culture, but also notorious for its tough streets. This is where Dustin Poirier's odyssey commences, in an environment where prospects are scarce and survival frequently hinges on resilience. Raised in a working-class district, Dustin wasn't an exceptional scholar or a youngster with grand ambitions. He was merely another boy attempting to navigate a world that offered limited possibilities. Yet, from an early stage, one trait distinguished him. He could brawl, and not just brawl, he could triumph. By the time he reached middle school, trouble had already discovered him. Fistfights weren't just an aspect of his existence, they were his existence. If someone cast the wrong glance at him, he threw a blow. If someone slighted him, he ensured they repented it. Academics became an afterthought. Instructors viewed him as a hopeless case, and peers knew better than to provoke him. However, what began as scuffles in the schoolyard swiftly escalated into something significantly more serious. The streets had their own code, and Dustin was engaging in a hazardous contest. Then, everything shifted. One poor choice, one reckless instant, and abruptly he found himself restrained in handcuffs. Theft, probation, expulsion. Before even turning 16, his destiny was slipping through his grasp. Sitting in a juvenile detention center, clad in an orange jumpsuit, he confronted reality. Across from him sat his mother, eyes brimming with tears, imploring him to transform his life. But deep down, Dustin wasn't certain if he could. The streets had provided him with an identity. Without them, who was he? Yet fate operates in peculiar ways. One day, while wandering aimlessly through Lafayette, he stumbled upon something that would alter his life irrevocably: a modest, dilapidated boxing gym. Inside, the rhythmic sound of gloves striking heavy bags reverberated through the air. The scent of sweat and perseverance filled the room. For the first time in years, he experienced something unfamiliar: purpose. He picked up a pair of gloves, wrapped his hands, and stepped into the ring. The moment he unleashed his first punch, everything aligned. This wasn't merely combat. This was discipline. This was self-control. This was the escape route. The boy who once fought to endure was now fighting for something far greater. Little did he know, the path he had just embarked upon would lead him to the pinnacle of the fighting realm. But the expedition wouldn't be effortless. There would be agony, heartbreak, and setbacks ahead. And before he could ascend, he would have to withstand the most grueling battles of his life. Amateur and early professional career. Dustin had always been a warrior, but now, for the first time, he was battling with intention. The gym became his sanctuary, a refuge where the turmoil of his past couldn't reach him. Every punch he threw, every bead of sweat that hit the mat, was a stride further from the streets that had nearly consumed him. He trained tirelessly, mastering not just the art of striking, but also the skill of strategy. Boxing instilled discipline in him, but when he encountered mixed martial arts, he realized he had discovered something even more profound. This wasn't just a competition, it was his salvation. Without hesitation, Dustin plunged headfirst into competition. His amateur bouts were ferocious, swift, and decisive. It didn't take long before people took notice. He wasn't just another hopeful fighter, he was extraordinary. His strength, his determination, his unwillingness to retreat. It all made him stand out, and the results spoke volumes. Bout after bout, he dominated. 8 victories, 1 defeat. His amateur career was brief but electrifying. And just like that, it was time to transition to the professional ranks. However, the journey ahead would be anything but smooth. Stepping into the professional circuit meant squaring off against fighters who possessed equal hunger, equal desperation to succeed. These weren't street brawlers or amateurs testing their limits. These were warriors, men who had been honing their craft for years. But Dustin thrived amidst adversity. His professional debut sent a clear message: a first-round stoppage. His second bout, another knockout. He wasn't just securing wins, he was making a statement. He belonged in that cage. But the ultimate validation came when a film crew arrived at his gym. They were documenting up-and-coming fighters, and they wanted Dustin. For 3 years, cameras shadowed him, capturing every moment, every clash, every hardship, every sacrifice. The documentary, Fightville, wasn't merely a film about MMA, it was a testament to how combat sports could rescue lives. And for Dustin, it was proof that he was treading the right path. Yet, as his star ascended, so did the challenges. He was no longer just fighting to prove himself. He was fighting for a future, for his wife, for his family, for the dream that had once seemed out of reach. Then came the call that would alter everything. The WEC, one of the premier MMA organizations in the world, wanted him. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. But there was a catch. He had to confront a caliber of competition he had never encountered before. This was no longer just about combat. This was about endurance. And for Dustin Poirier, endurance was something he had mastered long before he ever stepped into the cage. Rise in the WEC and UFC featherweight division. The phone call struck like a thunderbolt. Dustin Poirier was getting his opportunity in the WEC. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. But excitement quickly turned into harsh reality. The WEC wasn't a local fight circuit. This was an elite organization, filled with ruthless competitors. These were fighters who had been in the game longer, trained harder, and possessed far more experience. If Dustin wanted to survive here, let alone make a name for himself, he would have to elevate his skills beyond anything he had ever been before. And as he stepped into that cage for the first time, the weight of it all hit him. His debut fight didn't unfold as he had envisioned. Dustin wasn't just facing an adversary, he was up against nerves, pressure, and the creeping self-doubt that haunted him. He fought with heart, but when the final bell rang, his hand wasn't raised. A decision loss. His first real taste of failure at the highest level. Sitting alone in the locker room, head lowered, he asked himself one question: am I truly cut out for this? Many fighters would have crumbled at that moment. Many would have walked away and faded into obscurity. But Dustin Poirier wasn't most fighters. Failure wasn't an ending. It was motivation. He trained with more intensity, analyzed every mistake, and made a vow that it would never happen again. And when he returned to the cage, he was a different fighter, quicker, sharper, hungrier. He tore through his next opponent, finishing the fight in brutal fashion. The message was clear. Dustin Poirier wasn't going anywhere. Then, something even more significant occurred. The WEC was merging with the UFC. Overnight, Dustin wasn't just competing in a major organization. He was now fighting in the most prestigious promotion in the sport. The UFC wasn't just a dream anymore. It was his new reality. But the UFC wasn't a place for easy rides. If Dustin wanted to stay, he had to validate his worth. His first fight, a short-notice call-up against Josh Grisby, a top featherweight contender, just one victory away from a title shot. No one expected Dustin to win. No one even considered him a threat. But inside that cage, under the glaring lights, something ignited. Dustin dominated, exposing Grisby at every turn. When the final bell rang, there was no doubt he had arrived. The underdog had stunned the world. But this was merely the beginning. The victories kept coming. Fight after fight, he built his reputation, going up against dangerous strikers, skilled grapplers, and seasoned veterans. He was fearless, relentless, and rapidly becoming one of the most electrifying fighters in the UFC. But with success came added pressure. Fans began whispering about a potential title shot. His name climbed the rankings. And then, the biggest challenge of his career loomed ahead, a showdown with a relentless warrior known as the Korean Zombie. It was a battle that would redefine everything. First major setback, loss to the Korean Zombie. Momentum was in Dustin's favor. He was riding a winning streak, finishing opponents, and making a mark in the featherweight division. The murmurs of a future championship opportunity grew louder. Then came the fight announcement. Chan Sung-jung, widely recognized as the Korean Zombie. A relentless, iron-willed fighter known for dragging his opponents into deep waters and breaking them. This wasn't just another bout. This was Dustin's moment to prove he was ready for championship gold. The stakes had never been higher, but with high stakes came immense pressure, and pressure can either forge diamonds or crush them. Fight night arrived, and from the moment the cage door shut, something felt different. The Zombie wasn't there to just compete. He was there to dismantle him. The opening round was chaos. Jung pressed forward, landing powerful shots, refusing to take a step back. Dustin retaliated, but every strike he threw was met with an even more devastating one in return. By the second round, the intensity was overwhelming. Jung wasn't just absorbing his shots, he was smiling through them. And for the first time in his career, doubt crept into Dustin's mind. What if tonight wasn't his night? As the third round began, Dustin found himself deeper in the fire. Jung wasn't slowing down. He was forcing him into unfamiliar territory. Dustin had never experienced a battle like this, one where his best efforts weren't enough, where his adversary refused to break. Then, in the fourth round, the moment came. Jung secured a Dutch choke, Dustin's own signature move. The irony was cruel. He fought to escape, but the grip tightened, his vision blurred. The referee stepped in. It was over. He had lost. Not just lost, he had been defeated at his own game. The climb toward a title had collapsed in an instant. The locker room was eerily silent. No cameras, no applause, just the crushing weight of defeat pressing down on him. He sat there, bruised and exhausted, replaying the fight over and over in his mind. He had never been tested like that before, never been outlasted. This was supposed to be his breakthrough moment, and instead, he had been sent crashing back to reality. The dream of a championship opportunity, gone. The hype, fading. People were already questioning. Was he really as good as they thought? Had he reached his peak? Was this the beginning of his downfall? But Dustin Poirier had never been one to accept defeat. The loss to Jung didn't break him. It reshaped him. He dissected every mistake, trained harder than ever before, and made a vow that the next time he entered the cage, he wouldn't just win, he would make a statement. The journey back wouldn't be an easy one. The featherweight division was packed with elite fighters, and if he wanted another chance at the top, he would have to take the long, grueling road back. But one thing was certain: Dustin Poirier was far from finished. Move to lightweight division and career revival. The defeat against the Korean Zombie was painful, but Dustin refused to let it define him. He rebounded with a series of victories, proving that he still belonged among the best. However, something was off, something he could no longer ignore. The weight cut to 145 pounds was becoming unbearable. Each fight week felt like torture. He was starving, severely dehydrated, and barely managing to step on the scale. In training, he was sluggish, weaker, and drained before even stepping inside the cage. He had competed as a featherweight throughout his UFC career, but deep down, he knew the truth. If he stayed at this weight, he was destroying himself. Then came the breaking point. A short-notice fight against Cub Swanson in London. It was a disaster from the beginning. He had accepted the fight at 170 pounds, but in reality, he was 187. Dropping 42 pounds in a matter of weeks was pure madness. The weight cut nearly broke him, and by the time he entered the octagon, he was just a shadow of himself. He fought with all he had, but Swanson systematically picked him apart. After 3 grueling rounds, Dustin walked away with another loss. But this time, it wasn't just a fight he had lost. It was his passion for the sport. He couldn't keep doing this to himself. Something had to change. Sitting in his hotel room after the fight, battered and exhausted, he made a decision that would alter his career forever. He was done with featherweight. No more extreme weight cuts, no more draining himself just to make a number on the scale. He was moving up to 155 pounds. Some doubted the move. Would his power still be effective against bigger opponents? Would his speed translate? Could he handle the monsters in the lightweight division? Dustin didn't care about the doubts. He knew one thing. He would never let weight cutting take away his love for fighting again. And just like that, the fire inside him reignited. His first fight at lightweight was a statement, a ruthless first-round knockout against Diego Ferreira. No hesitation, no fear. He was stronger, quicker, and finally competing at his full potential. Then came Yancy Medeiros, another first-round finish. The message was clear. Dustin Poirier wasn't just a featherweight moving up. He was a real threat in the division. The stress of making weight was gone, and for the first time in years, he was truly enjoying the sport again. But lightweight wasn't just a fresh start. It was a battlefield. With 2 dominant wins under his belt, Dustin was thrown straight into deep waters, facing bigger names, tougher opponents, and former champions. This wasn't a new beginning. This was war. But war was something he had been preparing for his entire life. He wasn't just surviving in the lightweight division. He was thriving. And for those who thought he had left featherweight behind, only to be another name in the rankings, they were about to be proven completely wrong. Rivalries and title contention. The lightweight division was no place for the weak. It was filled with battle-hardened veterans, former champions, and fighters who had spent their entire careers at 155 pounds. Dustin understood that if he wanted to stand out, he needed to defeat opponents who truly mattered. There would be no easy fights, no gradual climb. He wanted the toughest challenges the UFC could offer, and they delivered. His next opponent, a former UFC and Bellator champion, a veteran of brutal wars, Eddie Alvarez. This wasn't just a fight, it was an all-out war waiting to happen. From the very first bell, chaos erupted. Both men threw heavy shots, neither willing to take a step back. Dustin rocked Eddie early, but Alvarez, the experienced veteran, found a way to survive. The battle turned ugly fast. Alvarez landed illegal knees on a grounded Dustin, and just like that, The fight was ruled a no contest. Dustin was furious. He had Alvarez hurt, on the brink of defeat, and an illegal strike had taken that moment away from him. The frustration burned inside him, but he refused to let it consume him. If he couldn't settle it that night, he would do it another time. But first, there was another name he needed to cross off his list: Justin Gaethje, the most violent fighter in the UFC. A former world champion in another organization, once undefeated, and infamous for breaking his opponents with relentless pressure. Many believed it was impossible to withstand Gaethje in a war of attrition, but Dustin didn't plan to outlast him. He planned to break him first, and that's exactly what happened. 4 rounds of sheer destruction. Gaethje shredded Dustin's legs with devastating kicks, but Poirier refused to crumble. He absorbed the punishment, countered with precision, and in the 4th round, landed a perfect left hand that sent Gaethje crashing to the mat. Fight over, message delivered. Dustin was now a legitimate title contender. He had defeated champions, survived battles, and finished some of the most feared fighters in the division. But unfinished business remained. Eddie Alvarez. The rematch was set, and this time there would be no controversy. The fight began just as brutally as the first. Violent, intense. Alvarez had his moments, but Dustin was sharper, more composed. When the opportunity arose, he unleashed a relentless barrage of punches. Alvarez crumbled. Redemption was his. Dustin had finally put an end to that chapter. Now, only one goal remained: a championship fight. Dustin had done it all: defeated former champions, endured some of the most grueling wars, and proved he belonged at the top. But he still didn't have the belt. The lightweight division was in disarray, but one thing was clear: Dustin had earned his shot. And when the UFC called, they had the perfect opponent waiting for him. A familiar name, a reigning champion, a fighter who had dominated his division for years, Max Holloway. But this time, it wasn't just another fight. This was for the interim UFC lightweight championship. One fight, one belt, one opportunity to finally become a champion. Interim lightweight championship victory. The fight announcement sent shockwaves through the MMA world. Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway for the interim UFC lightweight championship. It was a rematch years in the making. The first time they faced off, Holloway was an inexperienced fighter making his UFC debut. But now, he was a dominant featherweight champion on an unstoppable winning streak. Max had never been overwhelmed, never been broken, never been outclassed. But Dustin didn't care about hype. He had already defeated Holloway once, and this time, with a championship on the line, he was determined to do it again. From the very first bell, Poirier fought like a man possessed. He wasn't about to let this moment slip away. Every strike he landed carried sheer force. His power was undeniable. In the opening round, he staggered Holloway with a crushing combination. For the first time in years, Max looked vulnerable. But if there was one thing everyone knew about Holloway, it was that he wouldn't back down. He fired back, throwing relentless volume, trying to wear Dustin down. But Dustin had seen this before, and he wasn't the same fighter Max had encountered years ago. Round after round, the war intensified. Poirier landed the more damaging, precise strikes, while Holloway refused to take a step back. The fight was evolving into an all-time classic. Holloway kept pushing forward, absorbing everything thrown at him. But Poirier was different now, stronger, smarter, more composed. He refused to engage in reckless exchanges. He picked his shots carefully, landed when it counted, and punished Holloway for every mistake. As the championship rounds unfolded and the difference became evident, Max had heart, but Dustin had power, accuracy, and control. When the final horn sounded, both fighters stood battered, bloodied, and utterly exhausted. But there was no doubt about the winner. The judges read the scorecards. Unanimous decision. Dustin Poirier had done it. After years of relentless effort, heartbreaking losses, and setbacks, he was finally a champion. As the UFC belt was wrapped around his waist, emotions overwhelmed him. This wasn't just about winning gold. It was about proving he belonged at the top, about proving that every sacrifice had been worthwhile, and about proving that a ninth-grade dropout from Louisiana could rise to the pinnacle of the fighting world. But as incredible as the victory was, the journey wasn't over. This was an interim title. There was still one man holding the undisputed belt. One fighter who had never been defeated. One challenge standing between Dustin and true greatness, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undefeated, undisputed, relentless force of the lightweight division. Dustin had fought champions, defeated legends, and endured wars. But this was the toughest fight of his life. And if he wanted to leave no doubt about his place in history, he had to do what no fighter had ever done: defeat Khabib. The Khabib fight, a chance at undisputed gold. Dustin Poirier had finally captured a championship, but the mission wasn't complete. The interim belt was only a stepping stone toward the ultimate goal, becoming the undisputed UFC lightweight champion. And to achieve that, he had to go through one man, Khabib Nurmagomedov, undefeated, unstoppable, the most dominant force the division had ever seen. No opponent had beaten him. No one had even come close. Many believed Dustin was just another name on Khabib's list, another challenger destined to be overwhelmed. But Poirier had built his career on defying expectations. And on September 7th, 2019, he was determined to shock the world. Fight week in Abu Dhabi felt different. The heat was suffocating, the stakes even higher. But Dustin remained composed. He knew Khabib's approach: unrelenting pressure, relentless wrestling, and the ability to break his adversaries mentally before physically. He had seen it happen over and over. But Dustin wasn't like the others. He wasn't stepping into the octagon just to survive. He was stepping in to win. He had spent years refining his striking, strengthening his takedown defense, and conditioning his endurance for a grueling battle. If Khabib was going to break him, he would have to endure fire to do it. The opening round unfolded as expected. Khabib wasted no time, shooting for a takedown within seconds. Dustin resisted with everything he had, but stopping Khabib's grappling was nearly impossible. Within moments, he found himself on the canvas, trapped under the same suffocating control that had crushed every opponent before him. Khabib's grip was unbreakable, his pace relentless. Dustin struggled to create space, searching for any opening, but there were none. He survived the first round, but the reality was clear. Khabib wasn't just dominant. He was unlike anything Dustin had ever faced. Then, in the second round, a glimmer of hope. A brief opening. Khabib made a mistake, leaving his chin unprotected. Dustin capitalized, landing a thunderous right hand. Khabib staggered. For a fleeting moment, the world held its breath. Was this it? Poirier surged forward, unleashing a furious assault, but Khabib, like a machine, recovered instantly. Seconds later, they were back on the ground. Dustin trapped beneath the undefeated champion's relentless control. The moment had passed, and as the third round began, the inevitable was near. Khabib secured a deep, rear-naked choke. Dustin fought with every ounce of strength, clawing at Khabib's grip, but there was no escape. He tapped. It was over. The dream of undisputed gold had slipped away. As Dustin sat inside the cage, his expression a mix of exhaustion and heartbreak. The emotions sank in. He had poured everything into this fight. But it wasn't enough. Khabib was simply on another level. Yet even in defeat, Poirier kept his head high. There was no disgrace in losing to a legend. And if his career had taught him anything, it was that setbacks weren't the end of the road. They were lessons. His journey to the top wasn't finished. He had risen from the bottom before, and no matter how long it took, he would do it again. Because that's what Dustin Poirier had always done: charity work and personal growth. The loss to Khabib was crushing. Years of dedication, countless hours in the gym, and the dream of becoming the undisputed champion had slipped through his grasp. But as Dustin sat in the locker room drenched in sweat and emotion, a realization struck him. This journey had never been solely about a title. Fighting had given him everything: discipline, purpose, a family, and a future. But what was the value of it all if he didn't use it to make a difference? That's when his focus shifted to something greater than any championship: giving back. Dustin and his wife, Jolie, had already begun something remarkable. The Good Fight Foundation wasn't just another charity, it was deeply personal. It started small, with Dustin auctioning off his fight gear to raise funds for local causes. But soon, it expanded into something far greater. They provided backpacks for underprivileged children, meals for struggling families, and even helped build homes in Uganda. Dustin wasn't just fighting inside the octagon anymore. He was fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And with every act of kindness, he felt something even more powerful than victory: a purpose beyond the sport. Then came the story that changed everything. A 6-year-old boy named Aaron Hill, suffering from a rare brain disorder, had one final wish. Not for himself, but for others. He wanted a specialized playground built for children with disabilities, a selfless dream from a child who didn't have much time left. When Dustin heard about it, he knew what he had to do. He dedicated his next fight to Aaron, raised thousands of dollars, and turned that dream into reality. But before the playground was completed, Aaron passed away. Dustin was devastated. Yet in that moment, he understood. This was his true legacy. The UFC had given him fame. Fighting had brought him financial success. But this, changing lives, making an impact, was what truly mattered. He had once fought to escape his troubled past, to prove he was more than just a kid from Louisiana. Now, he was fighting for something bigger than himself. He wasn't just an athlete anymore. He was a leader, a role model, a man determined to leave the world better than he had found it. And no matter what happened in the octagon, the Good Fight Foundation would continue. Because true greatness isn't just about winning. It's about how you use your victories to uplift others. But make no mistake, Dustin Poirier wasn't done competing. He had climbed the mountain, fallen, and climbed again. And now, with the world watching, he was ready for one last ascent. The championship, the legacy, the wars inside the cage. It was all unfinished business. He had come too far to stop now. And the next time he stepped into the octagon, it wouldn't just be for himself. It would be for every person who had ever believed in him. Because Dustin Poirier's story was far from over. Legacy: Dustin Poirier built his career on perseverance. Every time he was knocked down, he found a way to rise stronger. He had defeated champions, endured wars, and carried himself with a humility rarely seen in the fight game. But one thing still eluded him: the undisputed UFC lightweight title. He had come close, held the interim belt, but interim wasn't enough. If his story was to be complete, if he was to cement his name among the legends, he had to win the championship. And he wasn't leaving the sport until he did. The journey back to the top was unforgiving. The division was filled with killers, former champions, hungry contenders, and rivals from his past. But Dustin thrived in adversity. He avenged his loss to Conor McGregor in devastating fashion, stopping him not once, but twice. The man who had haunted him for years was finally behind him. Then came another shot at the title, this time against Charles Oliveira. Dustin came close, but once again, the belt slipped through his fingers. Another heartbreak, another lesson. But this wasn't the end. If anything, it was just another challenge to overcome. Outside of fighting, his legacy was already secured. The Good Fight Foundation had impacted countless lives, bringing change to communities around the world. He had gone from a troubled kid in Louisiana to an inspiration, a philanthropist, a father, and a man who could look his daughter in the eyes and say, "I fought for something bigger than myself." Whether he won the championship or not, he had already won at life. But for a fighter like Dustin Poirier, walking away without that undisputed title just wasn't an option. The fire still burned. The hunger remained. So, what came next? Retirement? One final run at the belt? Another legendary battle for the fans? Only Dustin knew the answer. But if history had shown anything, it was this: never underestimate the diamond.